All right. Hey there, folks. Even though convention signings and other live events are back on track, I figured I would keep bringing book tour to you. So, welcome to Russ's Rockin' Rollercoaster, intriguing interviews with creative minds. Well, when it comes to science fiction, I think it's fair to say that certain authors have delivered stories that change the way we think. And tonight's author, at least for me, is no exception. So please welcome Robert J. Sawyer. Robert is one of only 8 writers ever, and the only one in Canada, so I'm told, to win all three of the world's top awards for the best science fiction novel of the year, the Hugo, Nebula, and John W. Campbell Memorial Awards. He has also garnered an additional 12 Hugo nominations, has had his work translated into 20 languages, and had his brilliant novel Flash Forward turned into a TV series under the same name. Welcome, Robert.
Delighted to be here, Russ. Thank you for having me.
All right, good to see you. All right, just a heads up for the folks at home. Feel free to send notes or questions you have for Robert in the chat box during the show, and we'll get to a few at the end. All right, Robert, as we always do, we'll start at the beginning. So, where were you born? Where'd you grow up?
I was born in Ottawa, which is Canada's capital, but I grew up and still live in Toronto, which is Canada's largest city. I was born in 1960, so I'm 64 years old. And the background of my childhood was Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Star Trek 2001: A Space Odyssey, and the original
Okay,
Planet of the Apes. That was my
okay, you
first
just you just
decade of
went
life.
through like 20 minutes of questions. So we're
There
gonna
you are. We got
okay.
tons to cover.
You're efficient. So it's funny. I mean, not funny, but I tell the story often. So I went to college up in Buffalo. And I never once, shame on me, I never went to Toronto. I
There
know.
are so many Americans who
Ah,
have never crossed the border, whereas it's impossible, literally impossible to find a Canadian who's never gone down
I
into
know,
the
I know,
United States.
I know. I had so many opportunities, but I was young and being stupid.
Yeah,
Just didn't do it, but I will definitely get there. All right,
a
so
wonderful city.
yes, yes, yes. So talk to me about so when you were growing up, did you have brothers, sisters? Was it just you? What was the setup there?
Had is the operative word there. I had two brothers. Sadly, one of them has passed away. He died of lung cancer over a decade ago. Um, and I have an older brother who is still with us, fortunately. But yeah, it was three boys in a house with two academics as parents. My mother's an American from born in Minnesota, but grew up in Berkeley, California. My father from Toronto, and they were your typical liberal professor academics of the 1960s. They went to see Hair and First Run, the musical, and that kind of
Oh,
thing.
oh, oh, wow.
So we were not allowed to watch violent TV shows, my brothers and I. So in that era, there was Man from Uncle, there was Mission Impossible, there was Rat Patrol,
Right.
which was about World War II. None of that. But my parents let my older brother watch Star Trek. And I was a little young when it debuted. I was 6 when it debuted, but I saw a couple of episodes in first run and was kind of sucked in by Star Trek.
Right.
And really, more than anything, that show probably is the reason that I'm a science fiction writer. So even though I'm an old geezer at 64, I'm part of that first generation of professional science fiction novelists who got their start with the media rather than with the pulp magazines.
Right. Right. So hold on. So there's actually a lot there I want to sort of unpack. So let's just go back to the beginning a little bit. So your parents were sort of these liberal academics. What were their special areas of focus?
They were both statisticians. My mother was, in fact, a child prodigy. She
Really?
graduated with her bachelor's degree from the University of California at Berkeley, whereas you can imagine in that era, she was the only woman in her class. At 17, she graduated with her bachelor's. Went on to do two more master's degrees after that. My older brother ended up being her PhD thesis. She's ABD, all but dissertation in her PhD in economics. But yes, they were both statisticians. My father, particularly an economic statistician. So they were very analytical. My older brother and my younger brother both worked in IT before there was even that term, computer programmers, computer
Right.
systems analysts. I was the oddball artistic one in the family. I loved science, I loved nature and so forth, but I was never a quant. I never had a mathematically inclined head. So I was a bit of an oddball, but nonetheless, They tolerated me.
Wait, so hold on a second. So I just kind of want to like paint the picture.
Yeah.
So you grew up in in the 60s and the 70s with
I'm
two,
still growing up in the
uh,
21st century, but yeah.
you and me both, with, highly analytical, hyper intelligent parents, and your brothers sort of, followed maybe intellectually in that sort
Yeah.
of in that vein. So when you say that you were the oddball artist of the family, what does that mean?
None of them, I mean, my brothers are terrific people and my parents too, but none of them did anything creatively. And they weren't poets, they weren't songwriters, they didn't write short stories, they didn't paint, they didn't draw, they didn't do any of that stuff. Every evening after school, late afternoon after school, in public school, my best friend and I would get together in my basement and we would draw pictures of spaceships and make up stories and all kinds of stuff. I was always a storyteller, a creative type. And they were, very bright, very intelligent people, but just not, that wasn't who they were. And in terms of wanting to pursue a career in this, as I say, my dad was a statistical economist. Because I was originally going to take a career path in academia. That was all I knew. That's what I wanted to do. Going to be a vertebrate paleontologist. I wanted to study dinosaurs. But then
Oh,
I had an 11th hour decision very last year of high school and said, no, no, I'm going to become a writer instead, a science fiction writer. And my dad went and got the statistics for the average income for the last 20 years for writers in Canada. Just got it on tractor feed, fan fold paper, left it at my place at the breakfast table, didn't say a word. And I said to him, yeah, but that includes poets. So I was determined to be an outlier. And I guess I turned out to be an outlier. My parents didn't discourage an artistic career, but they said, have your eyes open
right.
about the economic realities. And I did. And it's turned out, of course, wonderfully for me. But I did get schooled in how unlikely it would be to end up having the very particular life that I did manage to get.
Right. So you're in the 60s and into the 70s, and your parents, had in their minds that you would essentially follow in their academic footsteps. But that just wasn't you. You were more of a, at least from what I'm interpreting, you were a bit of a dreamer, right? And and a creative. So was it that you were into, you saying, your drawings, spaceships? Was it that you were into spaceships like outer space adventures, or was it
Oh,
more
science fiction ships,
right?
interplanetary starships, and
Gotcha.
aliens and the adventures. My friend and I had made up a whole. We had a spaceship we'd made up called the Dasher and the crew of it, and we drew pictures of them. My friend David Raymer was his name, very fine artist. Although he went on to become a horse groom professionally,
Naturally.
I was not a good artist, but I had big ideas. So David could draw anything that I could describe, sort of thing. I drew as well, but my stuff was never showed any talent as an artist, but the imagination was there in everything that I described.
Were you into the spaceships and the intergalactic machinations? Did that start before or after you discovered Star Trek?
So before, but it was because of television. Here in Canada, we got Jerry Anderson's Super Marionation shows all the time. He's most famous in the States for Thunderbirds, but there were a
Ah,
bunch of them. And prior to Thunderbirds, starting in 63, I think it was, when I was 3 years old, there was one called Fireball XL5, which was about an interstellar spaceship that had a crew with a robot as co pilot, and it was complete scientific hogwash to go out into space. They
sure.
would take an oxygen pill and have no spacesuit and just float out there in space.
Okay.
But it captivated me. That was what introduced me to the notion of space travel. Yes, vaguely, the Mercury astronauts were going up at 3. I wasn't conscious of that, but I was certainly conscious of Fireball XL5 and its theme song that begins, I wish I was a spaceman, the fastest man alive. And that really, I still take that as my personal theme song.
Okay. So you had this, you're talking about you had your best friend who was sort of in that with you. Was it kind of just, was it just the two of you, or did you have like a core group of friends who were kind of all into that kind of thing?
So here I'm at 64, and this Friday, which is the day after tomorrow as we're speaking, one of those friends from way back in public school now lives 3,500 kilometers away from me, is coming for a visit, and we're going to sit and watch one of my favorite science fiction films from the 60s, Quatermass in the Pit. It was released in the United States as 5 million years to Earth. So yeah, there were others.
Okay.
And I in high school I founded, in my first year of high school, the high school science fiction club. They didn't have one, and
Okay.
I'm still, many of my best friends are members of that club. That's where I met my wife. Many of my best friends still, and that was next year will be our 50th anniversary of that club's founding. So yeah, I had a lot of friends then and now, dating back to then, who were the science fiction geeks. We weren't good at sports, not in one of us. Well, Dave Raymer was kind of good at sports,
Okay.
but the rest of us, no, we were useless at that. But nonetheless, our imagination soared.
Now, I have to tell you, so I've been doing this show, I don't know, a long time now, and I've interviewed hundreds of people. I have to tell you, of all the folks that I've spoken to, whatever genre they're in, because I do science fiction, I do horror, and I do crime and mystery, and I ask this question a lot, what was like when they grew up, did they have friends and whatnot? Very few writers that I know now found their place and their people as early as you did. You
So
see, yeah,
you're exactly right, and I'm fully conscious of that. My best friend before Dave Raymer was in nursery school. His name's Michael Thompson. What a banal name! I tried to find him years later. How can you
right,
find a name like that? There are
right,
100,000 of them in the world. Turns out that when we were reunited 5 decades later, that he is one of the world's top antiquarian science fiction, fantasy, and horror book dealers. Lives out in British Columbia now. I found the right people very early on, and even though we diverged geographically,
right.
we ended up in many cases following the science fictional kind of dream. But I'll tell you so. I mean, since you brought that up, one of the things people say that distinguishes my science fiction is that, yeah, I've got all the science and techie stuff. That's great. I also have real human characters and a lot of human emotion in that. And I know that a lot of my colleagues were isolated, loners, and it was
Right.
in their own inner lives that they lived much of their childhood. I was and am gregarious, outgoing, extroverted. Had lots of friends then, have lots of friends now, lots of social networking. Before that term meant online social networking.
Right.
And I think that's what has informed and made my science fiction different than a lot of other people's science fiction. It is just as much about human interaction and human belonging and empathy as it is about the big ideas, the high tech notions, the
Yeah.
quantum physics or paleo anthropology or whatever it happens to be. That's the background of a very human emotional story. And
Yeah.
that has to do with how my life story, my own personal life story and interactivity with other members of Homo sapiens.
So I have a question. I'm not sure. I may or may not have a bone to pick with you. I don't know, but I have a question for you. So I've seen you out there, and you've been, at least from what I've witnessed, been vocal about not being a Star Wars fan.
That is true.
So I'm not sure if we need to have words.
Okay, so well, let me
See,
explain why I'm not a
well,
Star Wars
that's
fan.
what I just want
There's
to.
not a single thing wrong with Star Wars
Uh-huh.
except that people think it's science fiction. It is
Science fiction.
fantasy
Yes.
cosplaying, masquerading as science fiction. It's about wizards, it's about a mystical force, it's about a magical universe. George Lucas even signposted it right at the beginning with his paraphrase of the traditional opening of a fairy tale a long time ago in the fairy tale opening's land, a galaxy far, far away. And yet, in 1977, when science fiction, my whole life, had been struggling for respectability, and it
Right.
had attained some. Now, it's inconceivable to people today that we went through periods of long drought where there were no major science fiction films or TV series. But
Right.
there, in '68 we finally got the two, I think, two of the best science fiction films ever made. Of course, 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Yep.
the original Planet of the Apes, and then it was 9 years before there was another box office or Academy Award nominated science fiction film. Box office smash, Academy Award nominated. Well, of course, it's Star Wars.
Right.
And all of the process that had gone to making science fiction to be seen as a medium for social comment or philosophical exploration was thrown out the window with this escapist fantasy that was based on pulp serials from the 1950s. Enormous nostalgia trip for George Lucas, but
Right.
it made people think that there was nothing of any substance emotionally or intellectually in science fiction. And we bear that cross to this day because of Star Wars.
Do you
I
think
know you're wearing a Moss Isley t-shirt. I would say that you will never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy,
accountability? Yes.
those who say that Star Wars is the pinnacle of science fiction instead of the thoughtful, intellectual, and emotionally engaging work. And I say emotionally engaging. There's never in your life been a circumstance where you have been gobsmacked, you have been shocked and appalled, you have been knocked on your ass by a revelation where you have gone and screamed, "No, that can't be true." But that's what Luke Skywalker does in the cartoon that is Star Wars when Darth says, "I'm your father, Luke." He reacts in a completely unbelievable fashion. And as you know, Harrison Ford used to say to George Lucas, "Oh, just because you can write this dialogue, George, doesn't mean we can perform it." Right? It was not in any way as sophisticated as what had gone before, going back Star Trek, going back Forbidden Planet 57, whatever it was, going back to the day the Earth stood still. Science fiction had been struggling. And when I started, there were no academic courses in science fiction. Now that every university has them,
Right.
many of them teach my own work, but Star Wars has been the impediment to the public embracing of science fiction literature. So yeah, I see the little R2D2 behind you there. I see what's on the t-shirt. I know where you're coming from. But that said, since you brought up the issue, that is my beef. On its own merits, it's just as much fun and just as much eye candy and just as much of a romp as is Lucas/Spielberg's other project, the Indiana Jones films. But nobody would say that Indiana Jones is the pinnacle of historical fiction. Nobody would hold it up and say, it's way better than Lawrence of Arabia. But people say, oh, Star Wars? Yeah, I've read, I know all about science fiction. I saw Star Wars. It's got the dust bin that goes bleep, bleep in it. That's what science fiction is. And that's my objection.
Okay. I mean, I think I hear all the things that you're saying, and intellectually, I agree with you. However, let me just throw this back at you. I mean, but couldn't you make a,
However,
however,
that said, all
no,
right, let's take it down a few parsecs here and see what you can come up with.
but couldn't you make a pretty compelling argument
Yes,
that
yes, I can.
without Star Wars, we then don't get Close Encounters, we don't get Blade Runner, we don't get all the good science fiction that came afterwards?
So one could argue that. One could also argue that Steven Spielberg was hardly the tail that was wagged by the dog George Lucas as a filmmaker, and he was going to make Close Encounters of the third kind, regardless, I think, of whether Star Wars came along. He, after all, had his huge success with Jaws. He could do whatever he wanted to do, just as George Lucas had his huge success with American Graffiti and could do whatever he wanted to do. But yeah, absolutely. The problem is that 1977 is a long time ago in a
True.
century far, far away, and it still is the template. Now, Disney owns it, where we're still mining that same universe, that same paradigm
Mhm.
over and over again instead of moving forward. So, yeah, maybe it did provide the proof to the Hollywood bean counters that big budget and Star Wars, remember, A New Hope was not big budget, particularly
No, it
compared
wasn't.
to the subsequent films,
Correct.
but that a big budget there would be a return on investment in making big budget, special effects heavy science fiction films. Absolutely. It proved that to people in a way that nobody, not even Lucas, nobody anticipated
Sure.
the
Look, I mean,
success of
yeah, look,
Star
I mean, I
Wars.
would agree with you 100% that Star Wars is science fantasy. It's not science
Yes.
it's fiction, and that it's popcorn entertainment, and that's what it is.
And as I say, I have
Yeah,
no complaint
right.
whatsoever. It's like Margaret Atwood, who lives here in Toronto. So Margaret, I gave her a free pass on everything. She might say that was, we got everything was just fine until she started dismissing science fiction as talking squids in space. When Margaret passes, she's 85 now, I think. 50 years from now, the only works of hers that anybody is going to remember are her science fiction novels, and in particularly one, obviously, The Handmaid's Tale. Um, I object to the dismissal. I'd object to the fact that people use Star Wars to say, "Oh, I don't, I don't read science fiction. Why not?" As a friend of mine, Terrence M. Green, a high school English teacher, also used to write science fiction, used to say to people, um, when they say, "How can you write that science fiction garbage?" or "How can you read that science fiction
Yeah.
garbage?" What work of science fiction have you read? Not seen on TV, not seen in a Saturday morning serial, not seen in a comic book. What have you read that made you form this negative opinion?
All right.
And to a person, they have no answer. And then he says, "Well, you must have read 1984, Brave New World, Frankenstein, perhaps more recently, The Handmaid's Tale, Neuroman. You must have Dune." "Oh, yeah, but those aren't science fiction." Ugh,
Like
F off. Of
they're,
course they are. But
they're
what they
not.
are not is Star Wars. And
Right.
that is the
Okay.
conflation that I object to.
No, you know what? I buy that because obviously, I write science fiction as well, and in the general masses, most people you talk to don't read. They watch science fiction, but they typically don't read it. The genre nerds like us, we read science fiction, but the general
And
public
even write it.
and write that's what I mean. Write it. I said write and read it, but
Read it
they
and write it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but they typically don't read it. And then I'm going to dive into this a little bit more in a minute, but I want to talk about some other things while we're here.
Yes. Let's
Um,
get out of that galaxy far, far away and
yes,
back to the Milky Way here in the local group.
yes. So, all right. So, real quick, so are you still, do you consider yourself a Trekkie? Are you still into Star Trek?
100%.
Okay.
100%. You can't see it right there, but there's a 33-inch Enterprise right there from Master
Okay.
Replicas.
Okay.
I love Star Trek. I don't equally love all subsequent Star Treks after original series, but in fact the single biggest difference between the original series and all subsequent Star Treks was that it had an awful lot of people who had already established their chops as print science fiction writers, as writers for obviously Harlan Ellison, Jerome Bixby, Norman Spinrad, and Theodore Sturgeon, some of the greats, Robert Bloch, um, and that brought up the level. I remember the year
Mhm.
before Star Trek premiered, Lost in Space premiered, and it was without intellectual rigor, without social comment, and Star Trek was with intellectual rigor and a lot of important social comment. And I talked about my liberal 1960s upbringing by liberal academic parents who wouldn't let me watch violent TV. Something that has wars as its second name, Star Wars, is inherently about conflict and violence.
Right.
Star Trek, Trek is
Right.
the best known Afrikaans word in the English speaking world. You ask most people to name an Afrikaans word, and if they scratch their head, they can't come up with any. There are
Right.
only two that everybody actually knows, but they don't know are Afrikaans. One is aardvark, and the other one is trek. And trek meaning journey in Afrikaans, an arduous journey. And that, per aspera ad astra, I can get behind 100%.
So are you watching the modern Trek, the most recent
Yeah, I
iteration?
love Strange New Worlds.
Yes, that's my favorite by a long shot.
Yeah, absolutely. Because of course it's the most like the original series.
Yep.
I see you've got a lower decks poster behind you there.
Yes.
I was prepared to hate the Lower Deck Strange New Worlds crossover episode.
Oh, it's good.
Those old scientists, even though I like Lower Decks, but I didn't think they could possibly make the mix work. I
They did.
loved it. What a
Yeah,
brilliant episode.
they did.
I stuck through Discovery. Discovery was filmed here in Toronto, and I got to go visit the sets.
Oh, cool.
Strange New Worlds also filmed here in Toronto. And I stuck through Discovery, but it was shackled, from some bad decisions in the very first few episodes
Agreed.
back when Michael Chabon was running it. So there was no real salvaging anything you could do to salvage the Sonequa Martin Green character, no matter how brilliant Sonequa Martin Green was in the acting. This was a character who, there was just no way that path of that character was from traitor to Starfleet captain. Discovery certainly had its merits. And I'm happy that Trek continues to live long and prosper for sure.
Indeed. All right. So let's just go a little deeper into your author life. So you kind of decided early on, this is what I'm doing, this is what I want, and you've made a real go of it. So, like I do, you spend a lot of time writing a blend of science fiction and mystery. Now,
Yes.
so here's what I find interesting. So, in my travels, when I talk to the traditional crime, mystery, thriller readers, they have no appetite for science fiction. It's an abomination to them. They can't wrap their brain around it, even though there's a lot of stuff out there that they would almost certainly like, if not love, but they have kind of this just walled off bias where, oh, it's going to have aliens and spaceships and things, and I don't want any of that, even though good science fiction really isn't about that. It's more setting than anything else. Whereas science fiction readers tend to be a bit more open-minded. They'll kind of read a little bit of everything. What's been your experience in when you read, when you write those blended genres and
Yes.
the
And I blended a lot of genres, not just mystery, but
yes,
the Venn diagrams.
yes,
As a writer, you think, I'm going to take mystery and science fiction, and I will get all the mystery readers and all the science fiction readers. And instead, you get the tiny intersection set.
but that's exactly
And that's difficult.
it's
And,
aggravating. It's aggravating.
I think that science fiction and mystery have way more in common than
Yes,
science fiction and fantasy does.
absolutely.
Science fiction is about things that plausibly might happen. Fantasy is about things that never could happen.
Yeah,
But science fiction is about prizes the rational thought process. And the science fiction writer doesn't give you, unless it's the huge appendix at the back of Dune, doesn't give you a complete world building Bible of everything that they've created. Science fiction writers artfully salt clues into the narrative about what the nature of the world the story is set in, the economics, the interpersonal relationships, the governing system. It's little clues are salted in there, and the attentive reader is picking them up in the background and making conclusions about what really is going on. The same exact ratiocination goes on in reading a mystery novel, except the clues are usually very narrowly defined as
yeah,
being related to a particular crime, most frequently, almost exclusively murder in
yeah,
mystery fiction.
yes.
But the reading process is intellectual. The reading process is picking up background information that very deliberately, in terms of the clues, because in a mystery, because if they say, hey, here is the gun right here underneath this rock in chapter 1, no mystery, right? So it's
Right.
done with misdirection. In science fiction, the clues are simply done subtly so that you're not saying, as you know, Bob, the third moon of this planet we're on is actually an energy production facility that beams by microwave lasers. We don't do that, right? Clues. So I find them very similar. And I have to say, here in Canada, you're right about the general prejudice, but I have won the Arthur Ellis Award, which is Canada's top mystery award from the
Yes.
Crime Writers of Canada for a science fiction short story. And the Globe and Mail, which is
Yep.
the book review in the Globe and Mail, is our equivalent of the New York Times book
Yep.
review, the most prestigious review section in Canada. Their mystery fiction reviewer named my science fiction novel, A Legal Alien, the best Canadian mystery novel of the year it came out.
Oh,
So
wow.
it is possible to do that crossover or that combine of two genres and do it in such a way that even the mystery readers have to say, well, he's doing it better than we just do our straightforward
Yeah, yeah,
mystery.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay. All right. Just a quick interlude for the folks who came in a little late. If you have any questions or comments for Robert, put them in the chat box and we'll get to a few at the end. All right. So,
I see my friend and colleague Alan Smale there. Hi, Alan.
yes, yes, Alan. Yes, he's been a regular on the show as well.
Great
Uh,
guy. Great writer, too.
yes, he is. All right. So I thought about my next question. I've thought quite a lot about, and Robert and I were sort of chatting a little bit offline before we started. So you focus a lot of your writing efforts exploring human consciousness and religion mixed in with your sci-fi, and that's particularly interesting to me. I mean, you can if you look back on that back wall, it's all lined with philosophy and psychology and mysticism. I've got just books, and I've read them all, whether it's Wayne Dyer or Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud and on and on. And that's just because that's just what I read, and I infuse it with my own writing. And we're obviously now living in an age where technology, it's you can argue we're living in our future, the way that technology is fusing and it's just growing exponentially. So talk to me a little bit about your fascination, your curiosity about that intersection of human consciousness, religion, and science fiction, kind of how they all kind of come together in sort of this interesting sort of cornucopia there.
Sure. So I am an atheist, and yet I'm fascinated by religion. Three-quarters or so of the people on this planet have a worldview that is divergent from my own. And they believe in a creator, they believe in an afterlife, they believe in, all of these things that don't make any sense to me. But I want to understand why they think those things. And, maybe they're right. Maybe I'm wrong. Pascal's wager, right? I'm not taking Pascal's wager, which is better to believe in God and be wrong, because what have you lost, rather than to not believe in God and find out you're going to be punished
Right.
for your lack of belief in some afterlife, right? I'm not taking Pascal's wager. I just don't believe in God, and I'll, whatever happens, happens. Um, but I'm fascinated by
You
the issue.
realize now that your house is going to get struck by lightning now that you've said
Almost certainly, almost certainly.
it.
But I think science fiction ultimately is the wrong name for our field. I think it should be called philosophical fiction. It really is this um, genre of exploring big questions and big ideas. And in fact, if we were to rename it, not that I'll ever convince the world to do this, philosophical fiction instead of science fiction, we can still have a silly name and be called Fi-Fi instead of sci-fi. But
Okay.
in terms of consciousness, which really does fascinate me, because I'm an empiricist at heart and I wanted to be a scientist. Um, and yet, consciousness, which is the only thing that gives any meaning to existence, is almost completely subjective and therefore not amenable to scientific inquiry. You have to take I have to take your word for it that you have an inner life, right? Descartes said the only thing you can be sure of, cogito, I think, ergo, therefore,
I am.
sum, I am. I can't say a single thing about you. You could be, as my friend David Chalmers would have it, philosophical zombie. You could look like, for all external appearances, that you have an inner life, but not have one. And there's no way for me to tell that. So I'm very, very interested in consciousness from that point of view. I'm also very interested. There was a conference held at McMaster University here in Ontario a decade ago when I donated my archives to them. They held a conference in honor of me and my work. They asked me what it should be called. I said science fiction colon the interdisciplinary genre, because in science fiction you get fields of inquiry that would be separate university departments where the faculty members, unless they were serving on some collective bargaining committee together, would never even have met. juxtaposed together. And so consciousness studies of all the areas in science and philosophy, everywhere, it's the most interdisciplinary area of study. Neuroscience, absolutely. Quantum computing and traditional computing, 100%. Early childhood education, philosophy, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. All of this comes together to try and somehow make sense of why there is an inner life. And that interdisciplinary nature of it is what provides such great story writing fodder.
Yes. Yeah. So speaking of which, so let's get to Flash Forward. Now, for those of you, I don't know anyone who's watching or will be watching, if you've seen the show or read the book. So I saw the series when it first came out, unaware that it was based on your book, as we talked about before. And then my wife and I liked it. And then it got canceled, unfortunately. And then I just sort of forgot about it for a while. And then in the last year or so, I read Flash Forward and loved it. And for those of you who don't know, it posits that a CERN experiment um, shot everyone on Earth blacked out for about 2.5 minutes, and their consciousness was shot into the future for 20 years, and then they wake up, and then they say, "Well, what the hell happened?" And then they're trying to figure out what happened, why it happened, could it happen again? What does it all mean? Okay. So the thought that it was interesting because a lot of science fiction would have it be, would be, oh, it's time travel, right? Because in a way, it's quasi time travel in the sense that our consciousness kind of went forward, or either it went forward or we glimpsed forward. I guess it's kind of really hard to know. Now, in the book, the action is set mostly at CERN, and
Yeah.
we're looking at this from the scientist's point of view, and they're trying to dissect what happened and was it a fluke accident? And then they said, "Oh God, did we do this? I don't know. I don't see how." And then they start thinking, "Gee, I don't know. Oh God, maybe we
Maybe we
did do
did.
this.
Yeah. Maybe it's
Maybe
our
we did."
fault.
And then we started looking at it, and there's a couple of, personal mysteries in there. And, we were talking earlier offline, is that what made, I think, the book so terrific. And it's a very short book, actually. Is that the characters are very human and relatable. Like I cared about those. I was interested in it's not just what happened. It wasn't just the plot. It was how the plot impacted the characters. And that's why I really cared about what happened. Now, I just rewatched the series because I wanted to be prepared for the show. And I have a couple of thoughts, and I wanted to talk to you about this. So, what's interesting is that in the show, they took a different perspective, which was, and I'm sure there were lots of reasons why, some of which is that probably no one was going to greenlight a show that takes place in Switzerland and CERN. It
I
probably
mean,
just,
I can answer all those points.
right,
Absolutely. Because
right,
I had that conversation with the two guys who wrote the pilot, who optioned the book,
right,
and they're famous guys.
right. David
David
Goyer,
Goyer, who of course
yep,
wrote Batman Begins,
right,
and
yep,
most recently was showrunner on Foundation, the series
right,
based on
yeah,
Asimov's novels, and Brandon Braga, who was best known for having written more episodes in the Star Trek
Trek, yes,
franchise than anybody in history.
yeah,
And of course, co-writing First Contact, the best of the Next Generation movies.
agreed.
Um, I went down to Los Angeles. We had a meeting at Chateau Montmartre, which is a beautiful Hollywood hangout. Next table over, there's Keanu Reeves having lunch. And they said, "Okay, we love your book. This is Hollywood for you. Love your book. This is what we want to change, right?" And everybody said, "We love your book. We're going to do it exactly as you wrote it." And they said, and went down the litany of things that you were getting into there, Russ.
Right,
Uh, they said, first, your book is set in Switzerland, CERN, European Center for Party. No Americans will watch a TV show set anywhere but in the United States. And in
right,
fact, they only watch TV shows set in 4 cities in the
right,
United States:
right. New
Los
York,
Angeles, New York, Chicago, and Boston.
right,
Everything else, forget it.
right.
Main characters in my novel, three physicists and an engineer.
No way.
Nobody in the United States is going to
Right.
watch a
It's
TV series on
got to be
physicist and
cops
an
of some
engineer.
kind,
There are
right?
only three professions they'll watch:
Cops,
lawyers, doctors, and
and cops.
cops. So
Right.
we're going to have a cop married to a doctor and another cop who is
Yeah.
engaged to a lawyer, and everybody will watch.
Right.
And in your book, everybody flashes forward 20 years into the future, actually 21 in my book,
Right.
21 years into the future, American TV is all about
Now.
beautiful people. You
Yeah.
cannot have, no matter how beautiful our cast is in their 20s,
We can't age
can't
them up.
show them in their 40s or in their 30s, 50s, their 40s, 60s. Nobody's going to watch old people. It's got to
Right.
be just 1 year.
Yeah.
So my responses were as follows: fine, I don't care where it's set. 1 year, that's a mistake. What you should do, my friends, you're stuck here in Los Angeles. We've lost all notion of seasons. What you
Right.
should do is 6 months so that the flash forwards can be distinguished by winter and fall, or winter and summer.
Right.
And they said, "Oh, that's brilliant!" And then we could do it in real time, which
Yes.
ended up being how we did it: one episode a week over the 6 month period, catching up with the flash forward. And I said, none of that matters to me, except are you going to do what I wrote, which is a philosophical exploration of fate versus free
Okay.
will?
Okay. Now this
And
is
they
what.
said yes.
All right. Now that's what I want to talk about, and this is what I thought was real interesting. I didn't notice it the first time because it was new, and when it came out, you watch, you have 3 episodes, and then it's off for 2 weeks, and then you watch two, and then they're off, and
A
then back and
disaster in
forth.
scheduling, yes.
Right. So, but I watched the whole season within 2 weeks. And what was interesting, and I appreciated it differently, is that the show, as much as it was about the plot, what happened, who's behind it, in your book, it was just an accident. There was no evil conspiracy. In this
Right.
one, there's a very specific conspiracy. There's, the evil overlords or whatever. They're doing all the things for all the evil,
Yes, I did not like that.
right? For whatever reasons that they're doing it. However, what I realized this time is that I don't think it worked as well with every character, but the show was really about, well, a core piece of it was really about less about what happened and more about how the what happened affected and impacted ordinary people and how
Right.
they processed it. Some of it saw it as the end of the world. Some of it saw it as a fresh start. Others got a chance to, some of it broke up certain relationships. It formed new ones. Some people gave up hope. Some people had hope. And that's really, to me, that was the more fascinating component of what was going on there, even though the execution was a little inconsistent. But when it was at its best, and as I got deeper into it, the light clicked and I went, that, now that's interesting to me. It's,
Yeah. The
yeah,
the conspiracy aspect, which is not, as you say, in my novel,
right.
was a mistake. There's no question about that.
Yeah,
As I said, even at the time, all conspiracies are fungible. They all look the same. You can
right.
interchange them. And ours was so interchangeable that our villain, Dyson Frost,
Yeah.
uh, was played by Michael Massey, who had just the previous season been the conspiracy mastermind on 24. Like he was had this career
Right.
playing the guy
Yeah,
behind the
yeah,
mastermind thing.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
was a mistake. And in retrospect, I think Dave and Brannon would agree that it was an unnecessary flourish.
Yeah.
They had in their mind, and I always say this whenever I consult or work on television: never write to an image, a single image that you want to film. They had this image in mind, which is the one
Yeah.
that's in the pilot, where everybody has blacked out, and
Right.
then somehow magically,
Right.
within minutes of everybody waking up, or within a day, they managed to find the one security camera piece of footage in the
Naturally.
whole planet that shows one
Yeah.
person walking while
Yeah.
everybody else is blacked
Yeah.
out. Made
Yeah.
no sense that they could get that footage, but then they thought, "Well, what a cool image!" And the whole conspiracy plot line was all in support of what they thought was a real cool image in the pilot, and we did have a pilot before a series pickup.
Yeah.
So that did help sell the series, but it was absolutely a
Yeah.
mistake
I
to go
I
that
think they
way.
got caught up in the loss of it.
Totally. And we were getting a lot of pressure because we were in production in the last season that Lost was on, and they
Yeah.
were going off the air for sure.
Yeah.
We were supposed to be the new
New law.
Lost. And
Yeah.
we kept getting pressure from the network and other
Including
sources.
some of the main
Lost, right?
some of the
Lost.
characters actors from Lost were on flip.
Absolutely, that's right.
Yes.
And our writers' room and their writers' room were side by side
Right.
on the Disney lot in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And as we were pounding away to write Flash Forward, could hear them screaming next door, basically, as they tried to figure out how to salvage.
Yeah.
It's easy to pile mystery on mystery.
But
You can do that
eventually,
as they did for 5 years, but then at the end, it's all got to make
you
sense.
got to
They
land the
did it
plane.
in
Yeah.
Lost, and we really were making it up as we went along on
Yeah.
Flash Forward, the
Yeah.
TV series too. It's always a mistake. You
Yeah.
should know what you're writing
I
for.
wonder if the same show, and I wonder if it's possible to try again, if they did it today under the current model where it could be 10 episodes a season,
10. You
right?
know, it's funny.
It would
Yeah.
be tight and lean. There'd be no waste. You just have to get to the stuff.
So the original deal that we set up
Hmm.
was with HBO, not ABC. And
Oh,
HBO got David and Brandon wrote the pilot. Pilot script came in, and even HBO, this was pre Game of Thrones, but
right.
said this is a really expensive pilot. We can't
Yeah.
afford this. We either
Yeah.
have to water it down or pass on this. And so because our pilot was $12 million, which was a lot of money back in that day.
Right.
And they ultimately HBO retained a piece of the financial interest in the show. Very last credit on every episode in conjunction with the home
Right.
box office. But we went to ABC, and then ABC, of course, they're 22 episodes back then a season.
Yeah.
Way too many. You're right
Too
for
many.
the idea.
Yeah.
We also had the unfortunate reality that we went through not one, not two, not three, but four sets of showrunners in
Yeah.
22 episodes. So we'd kind of start in a direction. Somebody else would come in and say, no, I got to put my stamp on it. Oop,
Yeah.
got to erase that guy's stamp, put mine on. Ah, we're going to go this way instead. And
Yeah.
it really, so when you say, can we redo it today? Yes, absolutely. And ABC has the rights. I mean, it's all in my contract
Right.
that if they make a remake, I get this amount of money, blah, 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 blah. But it's up to ABC, which is owned
Yeah.
by Disney,
Right.
to say, yeah, we would love to do it again. And I would certainly love to see it. Me and my accountant would love to see it done again.
Fair enough. All right,
Yeah.
that was great. But now it's time for a special segment on where we spin the wheel. On the wheel are seven possible categories, including a few new ones I brought out for tonight's show. Wherever it lands is what you get, and the categories are Stranger in a Strange Land,
Love
Collective
it.
Collective Unconscious, Soundtrack of Your Life, I Am Rocket Man, Quantum Leap, No Such Luck, and Attack of the Clones. All right, you ready? Here we go. All right, what do we got for you tonight? We've got Attack of the Clones. All right, this
Oh
is
yeah, give me the Star Wars
of
ones, right?
course, there you
Okay,
go.
so I'm going to ignore
Uh-huh.
the reference to Star Wars and talk about clones because
Okay,
clones fascinate me.
yeah, well, okay.
Um,
If you could clone yourself so that
I'd be beside myself.
two identical copies of you were about out and about in the world, would you do it? The caveat is if one of your clone dies, the other is still alive.
So that's a very interesting question. One of my best friends is a twin, an identical twin, which is kind of sort of, when nature does that sort of experiment. And one of them lives in North America, the other one lives in Australia. They're, very divergent and yet very convergent as well. So I don't know, it would not be me. And this is that philosophical question when you upload your consciousness into the internet or into a robot body. Is it also you? Or is it just somebody who happens to be, looks like you and, it was like having a twin? I don't have a twin brother, but I've certainly had brothers. I don't object to their existence in any way, shape, or form. Would I do it as an experiment? Science fiction, I often say, is a laboratory for thought experiments that would be impossible, impracticable, or unethical to conduct in real life. And you've thrown out an unethical one. Let's create another human being just to see what the psychological impact would be. We can't do that. And I don't think, no, I have no desire for there to, I don't have a desire to share my royalties with another Robert
There
J.
you go.
Sawyer.
All right, fair enough. You're being practical. All right. Now we're going to pick your poison. I've got three choices for you, A, B, or C, but I'm not going to tell you what's behind each. So what do you pick? A, B, or C?
Pick a letter B.
B. All right. Okay. This is one of my favorite ones. Okay. You might appreciate this. This one's Benjamin's Button. I'm going to give you two options.
Benjamin Button effed me over. I'll tell you that right there.
Uh,
Benjamin Button. I wrote a novel called Rollback, which
Hmm.
was about a an elderly couple, man and a woman. The woman's a SETI researcher. The man is a broadcast engineer. The SETI researcher gets offered a rejuvenation treatment. The broadcast engineer, her husband's, I'm not doing it without him. They both get the treatment, but it fails for her. The SETI researcher succeeds for him, and it's about what it does when physically they're 50 years apart,
Mm.
even though intellectually they're the same age. And we had a very good screenwriter associated with an adaptation. And then the film version of Benjamin Button came
Uh,
out.
be,
And he said, he got antsy. He said, there's scenes I wanted to do that people will say, oh, you got that from Benjamin Button's.
yeah,
Not that it was in my novel from Benjamin Button's, but
right.
his take was
I see.
destroyed. So,
Uh,
Benjamin, you're out of here. You
uh,
are my poison. You cost me a movie. It's
uh,
Rollback. David
uh,
Mantries just asked, is this Rollback? Yes, my novel Rollback, a Hugo Award finalist from 1998, I believe.
all right. So, much like Benjamin Button, you can live your life fully in reverse, where you are born incredibly old and then you get younger until you reach your cellular state, or
Or
you can relive the life you have now, only knowing that any changes you would almost inevitably make from your past is going to impact your life going forward in any number of unpredictable ways, likely resulting in a new life going forward that doesn't quite look like the one that you have now. So, which is it? Life in reverse or life do over?
life do over. There are only a handful of stupid mistakes that I keep me up late at night still in my life, but they are ones that sufficiently vex me
Mm,
that I would think I could have materially improved my life. Now, that said, the premise for Flash Forward, where that novel and where that TV show ultimately came from, was the 20th anniversary reunion party for my high school science fiction club. And every single person at that reunion party said a variation of, if I'd only known then, 20 years ago,
right.
what I know
Yeah.
today, my life would have been so much better because I wouldn't have married that jerk, or I wouldn't have taken the wrong major at university, or I
Yeah.
wouldn't have gone to the dead end job, or I wouldn't have made the bad investment. So I asked myself at that point, I wonder if that's really true. I'm sufficiently uh, cognizant of my own abilities to think that with the foreknowledge of the mistakes I made, that one more do over, I could get it absolutely right this time. But my own novel, Flash Forward, says, nah, probably not.
Yeah, maybe not. All right. So I'm going to give you some truth serum. I got 10 questions for you. You ready?
I'm ready.
Favorite flavor ice cream?
Chocolate,
What's one food you will never eat ever for any reason?
fugu.
Fugu. What's fugu?
That's a Japanese fighting fish. It's poisonous.
Oh, God. No thanks. Okay. Bucket list destination anywhere in the world.
Olduvai Gorge. My people came from there.
Where's that?
In Africa, the African Rift Valley, the birthplace of humanity. It's
Oh,
where
that.
the Australopithecine
Oh,
fossils were
right.
found by Louis Leakey.
Okay. Good for you. All right. Scariest movie you ever saw?
Oh, wow. Carrie,
Oof.
the original Carrie, the Sissy
Yes.
Spacek version.
Yes. If you could have one superpower, what would it be?
Immortality.
Hmm. Do you play a musical instrument? And if not, which one if you could?
I don't, and I would enjoy playing guitar. My friends who play guitar seem to have such a blast with it.
Okay. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Favorite cocktail? And if you don't drink, your favorite unwind beverage?
I don't drink, and my favorite unwind beverage, and it's not a paid product placement, but
Okay.
here it is, Coke Zero.
There you
Coke
go. All
Zero.
right. Okay. You can see a live performance, sports, music, theater, whatever, any seat, any venue, any time in history. What's your choice?
Oh, wow. In all of history,
Yep.
Charles, well, no, I'm not going to say. Simon and Garfunkel, Madison Square Garden. I would have loved to have seen
Oh,
that.
yes. All right. Good choice. All right.
Yeah.
Other than Flash Forward,
Yes.
if you could get a continuation of any canceled TV show ever, what would it be?
Oh, wow. Um, there's so many that I love. Um, but so many of them jumped the shark and got canceled when they should have been canceled. But I'll go because happens to be the 50th anniversary this month. The Planet of the Apes TV series. It was
Ooh,
just starting to find its legs when it was
okay.
canceled after 13 episodes aired, 14 episodes produced
All
in
right. Great.
1974.
Okay, we're getting a little late on time, so I'm going to share my screen, and I've got some goodies for everyone to take a look at. So just bear with me for a minute. Here we go. All right, what do we have for you? Okay, and share. Here we go.
That's
Okay,
me. That's my book.
there you go.
Great
So,
cover design by Alicia Soule of Bibliofic Designs. Anybody who wants a great cover, she does wonderful, not just science fiction, she does all genres, but she did this terrific cover for me for my latest novel, The Downloaded.
so what's the gist of it?
The Downloaded is about two groups of people who upload their consciousness into a virtual realm. One group is astronauts who think they're about to embark on a multi year Earth's first interstellar voyage to Proxima Centauri. The other is prisoners who've been told if they upload, they can serve what it sounds like or feels like a 20-year sentence in only 10 months passing in the real world. They can decant when it's over back into their bodies with their families intact, their jobs waiting for them. Civilization falls shortly after they upload, 500 years pass, and they're the only survivors. These astronauts with the right stuff, prisoners with definitionally the wrong stuff, who have to try and live together as the only survivors of humanity.
Wow. So is it out now or is it coming out?
So it came out in October of last year first for 6 months exclusively, and is still available as an audiobook. Audible approached me and said, we will drive a pickup truck to your house and dump all kinds of money on your driveway if you will let us have your next thing for 6 months exclusively. So I created this. Brendan Fraser, Academy Award winner, was the lead actor, narrator, performer for the audiobook version.
Oh,
And
wow.
then 6 months later, in May of this year, it came out in print and an ebook. So if you have an Audible account, it's free to anybody who has an Audible account. They're using it as one of their things to A, retain people, and B, help them beat Spotify in their war for supremacy in the audiobook space. And it's available in print and on ebook in every platform. And I'm very proud of it. And I'm particularly happy that this late in my career, my 26th novel here, 25th novel, it's gotten some of the best reviews of my life. And as Ali said, listen to it, liked it a lot in the comments here.
Yes. Well, it's absolutely
100% true, sir. 100% true.
it's
Thank
good.
you, Ali.
It's good. It's going on my list. Absolutely. All right. So as for me,
There you
I
are, trigger point.
I am thrilled to showcase Trigger Points, the newest book in my ongoing series featuring hard-boiled private detective Angela Hardwick. In my mind, Hardwick is part Blade Runner, part Doctor Who, and part John Wick. In Trigger Point, Hardwick has recently been released from prison for reasons I will not explain, and as her first solo case back on the street, she's hired by a nasty pimp to track down whoever killed her best earner. And this isn't about business for him, it's personal. She's reluctant to take the case, but she has some history with this guy for reasons, again, I will not explain, and she needs the gig. But along the way, her protege, Eric Whistler, and her partner suddenly goes missing. So she's torn between tracking down the killer of these sex workers and her missing partner. But meanwhile, the fabric of space-time is literally beginning to crack. And it drags Hardwick into this realm of nightmares, symbolism, and the dreamscape, and it forces her to confront demons she had hoped really would stay buried forever. It's probably one of the most dangerous cases of her career, and if you've read anything about Hardwick, it really pushes her to the brink. It's already getting great reviews, and with the finale being called maybe one of my best ever, which is I'm really happy about. Trigger Point, it's available on Amazon. It's published by Crazy Eight Press. And I just want to be clear, even though it's the fifth book in the series, every thriller in the series is a standalone novel. You can read them in any order. It doesn't matter where you start. I reintroduce the characters and the world building every time out, so you can jump in wherever you're comfortable. Okay, folks, that is our show. I want to thank you to Robert J. Sawyer for coming on and talking about books and flash forward and all sorts of good stuff. And I want to thank everyone who's watching at home. And as always, be gentle, be kind, be generous of spirit, And for God's sakes, go read a book. And I'll see you all next week. All right, guys, that's it for me. Bye now.